Laying down 4x4-inch ceramic tiles across a 10 by 12 kitchen floor wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Ethan Harris, with his usual attention to detail, spread adhesive on each tile before placing it meticulously beside the last. He knew full well that even the slightest misalignment could throw off the entire project. As part of Benson's promise to deliver top-notch quality, Ethan made sure every single tile was set perfectly before moving on. Satisfied with the straight line he had just completed, his wife, Lydia, picked up the phone to call Benson on his behalf. Ethan, meanwhile, was already gearing up to start the next row, reaching for the box of tiles. It had been a long time since Lydia had spoken to him with any kind of warmth. Her tone these days was clipped, full of impatience. "When are you going to be finished?" she snapped, barely letting him get a word in. Ethan took a quick glance at the floor and figured he still had about 3 hours left in Pritchard's kitchen. As soon as he answered, Lydia cut him off and hung up, leaving him with that same familiar pressure to hurry up. But even though he felt the urge to speed things up, Ethan forced himself to slow down, knowing that any mistakes would only make things worse. As he worked, his mind couldn't help but drift to thoughts of Lydia, the woman he'd been married to for over 20 years. They'd met back in the early days when he started at Benson Renovation and Remodeling. He could still remember the first time he saw her, walking into George Benson's office. She'd been apologizing to her father for how poorly she'd done at George W. Dawson High School. Ethan had noticed her stocky build and wavy hair, but he'd quickly turned his attention back to the tools in George's shed, only to have George pointedly remind him, "That's my daughter." Ethan had just shrugged and replied with a polite, "Yes, sir," though he really couldn't have cared less. It was clear George didn't want his daughter anywhere near the new guy, but that didn't stop Lydia. She made it a point to smile and flirt every time their paths crossed. Ethan kept things professional. He wasn't interested, not one bit. But George still felt the need to give him a warning. "You're not chasing after my daughter, are you?" George had said one day. "No, sir," Ethan had replied truthfully. And he wasn't. To 21-year-old Ethan, Lydia was just a bratty 17-year-old who got on his nerves. She was overweight, her acne was terrible, and she acted like a child. The attraction just wasn't there. But Lydia didn't seem to notice or care. One day, while Ethan and another worker were unloading their gear after a long day, she tried her usual routine. "Hey, Ethan," she said, batting her lashes. Ethan was too busy struggling with a heavy bag of quick-drying cement to pay her much attention. "I'm turning 18 on Saturday, you know." She leaned in a little closer, giving him a clear view down her blouse. "That's nice," Ethan said flatly, focused on getting his work done. Another coworker smiled and added, "Happy birthday." Lydia wasn't deterred. "So, Ethan, what are you getting me for my birthday?" she teased. "Not in the mood," Ethan sighed and said, "Close your eyes." She giggled and did as he said. "What do you see?" Ethan asked, tossing his bag into the back of the truck. "Nothing," Lydia said, confused. "That's your gift." "Happy birthday," he replied, dragging the cement bag toward the barn. Despite Ethan's disinterest, Lydia's parents seemed set on pushing them together. Margaret, George's wife, insisted that Ethan attend Lydia's birthday party. Ethan didn't want to, but he bought a nice card at a medical supply store in Dolans, Utah, and picked up a cheap silver bracelet from a pawn shop in Fairway, Utah. Margaret wasn't done, though. She even convinced George to ask Ethan to take Lydia to the prom. Ethan reluctantly agreed, and on the big night, he tried to be polite, though Lydia squeezed herself into a tight sleeveless dress that made him wince. He posed for the pictures, danced with her, and even gave her a quick goodnight kiss, just trying to get through the evening. Days later, George scolded him because Lydia was heartbroken that he hadn't called her afterward. Against his better judgment, Ethan gave in and took Lydia out on a few dates. On their 5th date, Lydia gave herself to him, and not long after, Emma Margaret Harris was born, just 5 months after their rushed wedding. From then on, Ethan found himself stuck with the most difficult jobs Benson Renovations had to offer. He was convinced that George had purposely lined up some of the toughest gigs just to keep him sweating. The first 16 years of their marriage weren't all bad, though. Lydia had tried to be a good wife, figuring out what Ethan liked to eat, cooking his favorite meals, and even knowing when to keep quiet on Sundays when the Broncos were playing. She'd made some effort to lose weight, although it never really lasted. And while her skin had improved a bit, the acne scars were still visible. At least she tried, Ethan thought, as he focused on sticking down another tile. Once their daughter, Emma, started attending Grover Cleveland Elementary, Lydia got herself a job at the Garland County Public Library. It didn't pay much, but the health and dental benefits made it worthwhile. Not long after their 16th wedding anniversary, Lydia's cousin Gail moved to Dolans, Utah, dragging along her latest husband. Whether he was her third or fourth, nobody was quite sure. Gail had always been loud and brash, and her new husband Ben wasn't any better, especially with his obnoxious love for the Dallas Cowboys. Ethan, being a die-hard Broncos fan, immediately disliked him. Unfortunately, Gail's bad influence began to rub off on Lydia. She became louder, complained more often, and started neglecting her household duties. At first, Ethan didn't mind picking up the slack. He was pretty good in the kitchen and didn't mind doing the cleaning. But what began as occasional neglect from Lydia quickly turned into a nightly routine. She spent most evenings out with Gail and Ben, leaving Ethan to handle the housework. Their daughter Emma, just 12 at the time, began to take on more responsibilities around the house. She learned how to sew buttons on her school uniform and even cook simple meals. But instead of blaming her mother for her absence, Emma seemed to grow more resentful toward Ethan, as if it was his fault the family was falling apart. The tension between father and daughter gnawed at him, but he didn't have the energy to confront it. 3 hours after Lydia's call, Ethan finally finished tiling the Pritchard kitchen. His back was stiff from the long hours of work, and as he packed up his tools, he couldn't help but think about how much older he felt these days. At 43, the physical labor wasn't getting any easier. As he left Pritchard's house, he called his father-in-law, George Benson, to let him know the job was done. George's response was the usual, slurred and distant, a result of the stroke that had hit him after his wife Margaret had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Margaret had gone through a double mastectomy and grueling radiation treatments, but even as she battled her illness, she was the one caring for George during his recovery. When she passed, the responsibility of looking after George fell to his sons, Eric, Mark, and Kevin, with Ethan pitching in whenever he could. George, however, wasn't ready to let go of life. He insisted on being wheeled into the office every day, cursing his useless left hand as he tried to type with one finger. Someone always had to drive him home after, either Eric, Mark, or Kevin. After updating George on the job, Ethan was met with a few garbled grunts and hung up the phone. When Ethan arrived home, the smell of pork chops, mashed potatoes, and green beans greeted him. An unusual treat since Lydia had put the family on a heart-healthy diet after George's stroke. While Ethan had managed to lose 40 pounds on the diet, Lydia hadn't been as lucky. She struggled with her weight, despite her efforts, and Ethan often joked that Emma went all the way to Brigham Young University just to escape her mother's bland cooking. Emma never denied it. As Lydia worked in the kitchen, Ethan leaned in for a kiss, but she waved him away, scrunching her nose like he smelled bad. Not in the mood to argue, he threw his dirty clothes in the hamper and headed straight for the shower. The hot water helped ease the aches from his tired muscles, but he couldn't shake the feeling that life was wearing him down. The work he used to do so easily now left him sore and drained. After drying off, Ethan caught a glimpse of himself in the foggy mirror. He was still in decent shape, thanks to years of manual labor, but his body was feeling every bit of its 43 years. He headed downstairs just as Lydia was setting the table. "For dessert, we've got hot apple pie," she said, placing a frosted mug and a cold beer in front of him. The sight of the frosted mug took Ethan back to months before their 17th anniversary, the last time Lydia had served him beer like that. It had been her 35th birthday, and with Emma out for the night, Lydia had poured Ethan a frosty beer and sat down for what seemed like a casual conversation. But it hadn't stayed casual for long. "Darling, there's something I need to talk to you about," she had said after a while. Ethan had urged her to get to the point, and that's when she dropped the bomb. Gail and Ben had an open marriage. Then she asked if Ethan had ever thought about being unfaithful. Ethan hadn't lied. "Of course I have," he admitted. "I'm a man, aren't I? I've looked at that girl Shelley from the gas station." Lydia had laughed in his face. "Shelley? As if she'd ever go for you." Ethan had shrugged it off. I'm married, though. Sure, I look. But that's where it ends. You didn't think I'd actually do something, did you? Lydia had pressed him further, asking if he thought he could act on it without consequences. Ethan shut that down quickly. I can't, Lydia. We're married. We made vows, remember? After that, he'd rinsed his mug and reminded her, we don't need new vows. The ones we made are enough. But Lydia hadn't let it go. She brought it up twice more, suggesting maybe they should follow Gail and Ben's example. Each time, Ethan rejected the idea flatly. Do you even hear yourself? He'd snapped the last time. If you think me letting you cheat somehow proves I love you, then maybe I don't love you after all. Frustrated beyond belief, Ethan called Lydia's father the fourth time she brought up the idea of an open marriage. As the phone rang, Lydia's face turned pale. Hello, George. How are you? Ethan greeted. Lydia looked stunned as she realized who he was speaking to. Then, to make matters worse for her, Ethan asked for Margaret. Hey, Margaret, Lydia has something to share with you, he said, handing the phone to her. Go ahead, Lydia. Tell your mom what Gail told you. Reluctantly, she took the phone. As she tried to stand up and walk away, Ethan placed a firm hand on her shoulder, keeping her in place. Lydia stammered out a few incoherent words before ending the call, visibly shaken. You're despicable, she hissed at Ethan. He didn't flinch. Listen, Lydia, he warned. If you ever mention this open marriage nonsense again, we're done. Divorce, no question. That was the last time she brought it up. Ethan felt a sense of relief when Gail and Ben, whom he'd nicknamed the Toxic Twins, started fading from their lives. Their toxic visits became less frequent, and things quieted down for a while. 5 years later, as Ethan sat down for dinner, he noticed Lydia clumsily pouring his beer, almost spilling it with foam. She clearly wasn't good at it. I'll be 40 next Tuesday, she announced as he took a bite of his pork chop. Yes, I know, he replied between chews. And I was a virgin when we met, she added, a note of resentment in her voice. Ethan nodded, not too interested in where this was going. 40, and a virgin. That's something, he remarked, taking another bite. Lydia, however, wasn't letting it go. All these years, I've only been with one man, she said, emphasizing her point. Lucky for you, Ethan quipped. She shot back. You've probably been with at least 10 women, right? Ethan sighed. Life's not always fair, is it? He responded, taking a sip of his beer. Lydia, clearly building up to something, continued. Considering all I've done for you, Emma, and my parents, don't you think I deserve a little freedom? Ethan kept eating, already knowing where this was headed. Gail and I are heading to Vegas next week. She found a deal at a casino. Ethan said nothing, focusing on his food. While we're there, we might meet some guys, she continued. Not for anything serious, just a date or two. It might help me appreciate what I have even more. Ethan calmly commented, the sauce is almost perfect tonight. But Lydia wasn't backing down. Ethan, I'm serious. This is about me branching out, gaining new experiences. So, you're telling me you want to be unfaithful? He asked, his voice calm. I've made up my mind, Lydia said. You can either support me, or we can get a divorce. It's your choice. Without missing a beat, Ethan replied, fine, I'll start the divorce. Do we have any ice cream for this pie? Lydia was momentarily caught off guard. Wait, Ethan. Divorces cost a fortune. We should think this through, she stammered. Ethan pushed his empty plate away. What's there to think about? You've already decided. You're going to Vegas with Gail, and you're not asking for permission. You've already made up your mind. Forget about our bills, our marriage. You're just focused on Vegas. And you think it's fine to go on dates with other men while still being married? That's your idea of freedom? It's just 1 week, Lydia defended, her voice a little weaker now. A week, a day, an hour. It doesn't matter. Cheating is cheating, and I'm not going to stay married to someone who thinks that's okay, Ethan said, slicing into the pie. No ice cream, then? Lydia tried to steer the conversation back. Maybe Gail can go with you, she offered weakly. Ethan chuckled. Absolutely not. I wouldn't be with Gail if she were the last person on earth. He took a bite of the pie, immediately frowning. Oh, great. You used that fake sugar stuff again, didn't you? Pushing his plate away, He stood up, wiped his mouth, and left the kitchen. "I'm seeing a lawyer tomorrow," he declared, heading upstairs. With the Pritchard job done and no new projects lined up, Ethan had some time to spare. "You never listen," Lydia called after him, her voice breaking through the silence. "Sure I do," Ethan yelled back from the stairs. "I told you what would happen if you brought this up again. We're getting divorced." In their third bedroom, which he had turned into a home office, Ethan powered up his old computer. It was outdated, but it worked. After a quick search, he found Stacy Reed, a local divorce attorney, and filled out her online form. Within minutes, he got a call confirming a meeting for the next morning. The next morning at 5:30 a.m., Ethan woke up like he always did. Even though he didn't have any work lined up, his body was still on its routine schedule. He quietly left the bed, making sure not to wake Lydia, and headed downstairs to brew some coffee. Checking his phone, he saw an email from Stacy Reed's office with instructions for their 7 a.m. meeting. He debated having a second cup of coffee, but decided against it when he heard Lydia moving around upstairs. If she wanted coffee, she could make it herself. As he sat sipping his coffee, he overheard her voice from the stairs. No, I told him. Give it to me," she said, clearly on the phone with someone. When Lydia spotted Ethan calmly reading the news on his phone, she let out a shriek and quickly ended her call. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. "I told you. Eric hasn't gotten approval to start rebuilding the federal savings and loan, so I'm free today," Ethan replied evenly. "The grass is too damp to mow, so I'm catching up on the news. Did you hear Burns & Burns is thinking about opening a second location? You could have saved me some coffee," Lydia grumbled. "You can ask Gail to make you some," Ethan said dryly, placing his empty cup in the sink. Later that day, Ethan sat across from Stacy Reed, an attractive brunette who wore glasses that Ethan suspected were just for show. Stacy flipped through their financial documents and remarked, "You recently refinanced at 3.9%? "Yes," Ethan explained. "My daughter's finishing her last year of college, and my in-laws had huge medical bills. Their deductibles were sky high. Plus, there were funeral costs and a few work projects that went over budget because Kevin didn't time the orders right." Stacy nodded thoughtfully. "So, Mr. Harris, how do you think divorcing your employer's daughter will impact your job?" "I'm ending my relationship with Benson altogether," Ethan said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But Lydia's job at the library won't be affected." By Friday, Eric still hadn't gotten the green light for the renovations, and Ethan was working at home when Lydia called. Her voice was full of anger. "What is this? Some kind of scam?" "Oh, you got the papers," Ethan responded calmly. "What's wrong with the first-floor bathroom? You mentioned something needed fixing, but I couldn't find the issue." "The lock's sticking," Lydia replied. "We'll talk about it when I get home." "No, we've already talked, Lydia. You listen more to Gail than you do to your own husband." "I'm done talking," Ethan said firmly. "I don't want a divorce," Lydia said, her voice breaking. "And I don't want to be married to someone who's unfaithful," Ethan shot back. "Anything else?" "No," she whispered. "Goodbye then," Ethan replied, hanging up and ignoring her next call. Not long after, George's number flashed on Ethan's phone. When he answered, George erupted with a flurry of angry words. Ethan could make out plenty of swearing as his father-in-law demanded answers. "It's simple, sir," Ethan said. "Gail and her husband have an open marriage, and they've influenced Lydia to want the same. I said no. Lydia gave me an ultimatum: accept it or divorce. So, I chose divorce." George tried to argue, his voice breaking, but Ethan held firm. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but you have 3 sons and a daughter. Let them handle this. I've got no interest in a business that's been losing money for years anyway." Later that evening, Lydia came home with backup, Gail and Ben. Ethan wasn't surprised. He kept quiet as the toxic twins laid out their views. "See, Ethan," Ben began smugly, "our marriage is secure, so Gail's free to have friendships outside of it." Gail chimed in, "And we share everything, no secrets. It's brought us closer." "Great to know," Ethan said flatly, rising from the couch. "Lydia, after the divorce, you can share your life with whoever you want." Ben smirked. "So, Because you feel insecure, Lydia has to suppress her own desires? Ethan grinned, flashing his teeth as he walked toward the stairs. If believing that makes you feel better, go right ahead, he said before disappearing from the room. That night, Lydia tried to get close to Ethan in bed, but he shut her down. Rest up, Lydia. You've got a busy day ahead, don't you? He said with a mocking smile. As usual, Ethan woke at 5:30 the next morning, not bothering to be quiet as he left the room. He no longer cared whether he woke Lydia up. After brewing some coffee, he sat down and read the news on his phone, scoffing at the headlines. Politicians should have to live by their own standards, he muttered. No lifetime perks, no private health care. Try living on Social Security like everyone else. At 11 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Ethan answered to find Ben standing there, looking eager to come inside. I'm here to pick up Lydia for the airport, Ben said, making a move to enter the house. Ethan stopped him with a firm hand. I'll let her know you're here, he said, nudging Ben back and closing the door. He returned to his sitcom, not bothering to tell Lydia until she came downstairs with her suitcase. Why didn't you tell me they were outside? Lydia snapped. I figured you'd find out soon enough, Ethan replied coolly, not bothering to look up from the TV. Oh, right. Ben and Gail are here, Ethan replied, barely looking up from his show. Seriously? Must you act so immaturely? Lydia huffed. She leaned in as if to kiss him, but Ethan sidestepped, leaving her to kiss the air. We'll talk when I get back, she said, trying to sound firm. No, we won't, Ethan responded, his eyes still on the screen. After watching his sitcom and enjoying a quiet meal, Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon painting the front door a pale yellow, which contrasted beautifully with the red brick of their house. Their cat, Samson, meowed from the garage. I'll let you out once the paint dries, buddy, Ethan said, smiling. Later, upstairs, he canceled their shared credit cards. He didn't know if Lydia had any of her own, but he wasn't about to support her new lifestyle, or Gail's. He withdrew half the balance from both their joint and Lydia's personal bank account, then opened a new account in his name and transferred the funds there. He also removed his name from the utilities and cable service, shrugging off an email from the power company that said the cancellation would take effect at the end of the billing cycle. Doesn't matter, he muttered. With his stomach growling, Ethan thought about Sloan's Pizza, a place Lydia never let him eat. Maybe I'll drop dead from a heart attack, he joked to himself as he ordered a pizza and a draft beer. At the restaurant, he flirted with the waitress, even though she was a bit overweight. She smiled back, tapping his wedding ring with a long nail, which soured his mood. Back at his truck, Ethan struggled but finally pulled the ring off, tossing it in the console. Forever love. Huh, Lydia? Guess that ended today. At the gas station, Ethan originally planned to pump just $10 worth, but on impulse, he decided to fill the tank. Filling 22 gallons sure takes time, he mumbled as the pump chugged along. Inside the convenience store, he grabbed a six-pack of Budweiser and noticed a pint of strawberry ice cream. He picked it up too, recalling that Shelley, the pretty cashier who once worked there, was now married, much to his and many other men's disappointment. Megan Lane, the new petite brunette behind the counter, was nearly as attractive as Shelley. Ethan grinned when she stepped onto a milk crate to reach the register. He'd once asked her height, and she'd sharply replied, 4 feet 8 inches. How short are you? She had burst into laughter when he quipped, short enough to laugh with you. Ever since then, she'd affectionately called him Shorty. Your wife out of town, Shorty? Megan asked, eyeing his purchases. My wife's gone for good, Ethan replied. Megan gave a quick glance at his ringless hand. So where are you taking me on our first date? She teased, brushing her hair back. Megan, why would someone as lovely as you want to date an old guy like me? Ethan asked, smiling. That's about 7 inches, Megan joked, bagging his items. A few days later, on Wednesday, Emma called Ethan. Dad, yesterday was Mom's birthday, she reminded him. Yeah, so? Ethan asked, scratching his stubbled face. Why didn't you call her? Emma pressed. I didn't want this, Ethan sighed. I just didn't, kiddo. Why not? Emma asked, confusion in her voice. You'll understand soon, Ethan replied. Your mother thinks that because she's 40, she should be with other men. What? Emma exclaimed, shocked. You heard me, Ethan said, his tone bitter. What do they teach you in school? Married women don't date other men, Emma. Oh, Dad, that's so old-fashioned, Emma laughed, dismissing it. Goodbye, Emma, Ethan said, cutting the call short. 10 minutes later, Lydia's number appeared on his phone. Even though he recognized the caller, he answered. Benson Renovation and Remodeling, he greeted. Hi, Ethan, Lydia said, her voice cold. So, how's life as a 40-year-old? Ethan asked sarcastically. This isn't a joke, Ethan, she snapped. I agree, it's not funny, Ethan replied. And thanks for canceling the credit cards, Lydia added. You're welcome, Ethan said flatly. Anything else? My birthday was yesterday, Lydia said. Why didn't you call? I didn't want this. Maybe whoever you're with wished you a happy birthday, Ethan suggested, his voice steady. Grow up, Ethan, she retorted. Really, Lydia? Grown-ups honor their commitments and respect their vows, Ethan replied calmly. Who's Monica Blake? Lydia asked, trying to change the subject. Remember Monica Klein? She married Sophia Blake, the bank manager, Ethan clarified. She's with Gold Standard Real Estate now, and I've got this adorable redhead who thinks she can sell our house fast. Buyer? Ethan, we're not selling the house. Lydia yelled over the phone, her voice full of shock. Can you really afford to be surprised? Ethan asked, remaining calm. Monica told me we'd have to settle the second mortgage. She might find a buyer, but we'll likely need to bring cash to the table to clear it. We're not selling the house. Lydia repeated, louder this time. I've already moved your stuff to Easy Warehouse on Independence Road. Unit 212. Your dad has the key, Ethan added. Oh, Lord, I need to get home. Lydia's voice wavered in distress. Eric's? You left Samson at Eric's? He has those Dobermans, she shouted, panicking. Yeah, I didn't think about that, Ethan chuckled. No wonder Eric was so eager to take the cat. Ignoring her pleas, Ethan ended the call and left the phone on the kitchen counter. He went upstairs to browse the internet. When his phone rang again, he didn't bother picking it up. Maybe her new boyfriend can cover Emma's final year of school, he muttered to himself. Or maybe she can get a scholarship with that 2.1 GPA. After shutting down the computer, Ethan shaved off 3 days of stubble and took a hot shower. Once dressed, he grabbed his laptop from the pickup truck's cab. His last task was to toss his phone in the trash and roll the bin to the curb. Out on the street, his neighbor Walter Gibbs greeted him. Gonna miss you, Ethan, Walter said, offering a handshake. Come on, Walter, Ethan laughed. We've barely talked, except for when you complained about Emma's boys blasting their music. Yeah, but you were the perfect neighbor. Never asked for favors, never had me feed your cat or collect your mail, Walter sighed. The next folks might be all over me. Well, you brought that on yourself by being so friendly, Ethan joked, shaking his hand again. Just then, the trash can rang. Your bin's ringing, Walter pointed out. Mind your business, probably a raccoon. Ethan smirked and went inside. Meanwhile, Lydia was fumbling with the lock at the front door, only to find her key didn't fit. Staring at the for sale sign in disbelief, she quickly dialed the number for Gold Standard Real Estate. She cursed under her breath as the call connected. Gold Standard Real Estate, Monica Blake speaking. This is Lydia Harris, Lydia snapped. My key doesn't work at my own house. Oh, Ronald Harris's ex, Monica chirped. Ex? Lydia retorted, stunned. I need you to sign some paperwork. And guess what? I've got a few interested buyers, Monica continued. It's not for sale, Lydia exclaimed. So, are you buying out Mr. Harris, then? The Richmonds like the Purcell house too, but your place could sell quickly. Frustrated, Lydia hung up and called Ethan. When he answered, she spat, You idiot. Benson Renovation and Remodeling, Ethan responded smoothly. Ben, growing impatient, interrupted her. We need to go, Lydia. My cat. Lydia suddenly remembered, sliding into the car. Eric picked up when she called him next. Did you get Samson? With Dad's Dobermans around? They'd shred that cat, Eric snapped. No, Dad has him. You'll have to get him because his physical therapist is allergic. Thank goodness, Lydia sighed in relief. Thanks, Eric. You know, Ethan leaving almost bankrupted us, Eric added. I secured a federal loan but had to let Fairmonte take it. None of us can lay ceramic tile. Uh-huh, Lydia muttered, half listening as she dialed her father's number. Don't you have unlimited minutes? Gail asked, irritated by Lydia's constant calls. Nope. I've got 1,000 minutes a month, and Mr. Football here used most of them, Gail grumbled. Last call, Lydia assured, as her father finally agreed to let her come over. Ben drove them to George Benson House. After a quick hug with Gail, Lydia headed inside, leaving her cousin with Ben. How'd it go? Ben asked. Disastrous, Gail sighed. Who'd want her? Not with you around, Ben teased as he watched Lydia disappear inside. Any money from her? Gail asked, always curious. Almost, Ben said, pulling out of the driveway. But Ethan's a real pain. He canceled her credit cards. Well, ATMs are everywhere, Gail pointed out. Yeah, she got about $10, Ben muttered, shaking his head. We need gas, Gail grumbled as they drove. With ATMs and the internet, she's fine, Ben said, shrugging off the issue. Unless your football-obsessed husband isn't hogging all the minutes, Gail retorted. Ben handed her $20. Just grab $10. We've still got the electricity bill to cover unless you've settled it already, Gail suggested. Ben nodded and went inside the convenience store, glancing at the beer cooler as he passed. When he returned, he was holding just one can. Really? One can? Gail asked, raising an eyebrow. When's the last time you settled for just one? Ben mumbled something unintelligible and then commented, Hey, isn't that petite lady new here? How does she have such a big chest? Gail rolled her eyes. She's petite. Makes everything look bigger in comparison. Let's just get the gas, Ben urged, changing the subject. As they continued bickering, Lydia endured a furious monologue from her father. Since his stroke, George had become cruder, throwing around insults without a filter. When's the last time you looked in the mirror? You look like a fat pig, he barked. That face looks like it was saved with an ice pick. Dad, Lydia exclaimed, hurt and humiliated. Turning 40? So what? George grumbled. Women turn 40 every day, but not all of them betray their families at 40. He gestured toward the legal documents on the coffee table. Just then, Samson wandered into the room. You'll need a lawyer, George snapped. And I need to clean that damn litter box. Good Lord, I don't know what that animal eats, but it stinks up the whole place. You're back in your old room, he added tersely. I hope betraying us was worth it. Do you hear me, Lydia? I hope it was. That night, Lydia lay in her childhood bed, staring at the faded wallpaper she and her mother had picked out when she was just 8 years old. Samson curled up nearby as she switched off the light, staring into the darkness. The week had started off so differently. Her 40th birthday trip to Vegas with Gail had begun on a high note. Lydia remembered how excited she'd been as the city lights twinkled below their plane. After checking into the hotel, they hit the roulette table, eager to enjoy their first night. But things took a turn when Lydia's credit cards were declined one by one at dinner. Only her debit card went through, and when she checked her bank account, she saw that half her balance was gone. Both she and Gail were furious, blaming Ethan for overstepping. Come on, Lydia. We're in Vegas. Don't let this ruin the fun, Gail urged. But watching Gail lose $300 at the blackjack table didn't exactly help Lydia's mood. That was my $300, Gail muttered, clearly annoyed. Later, Lydia met a handsome young man, 25-year-old Adam Collins, at a bar. They headed back to her room, but the encounter was brief. Only 4 minutes, as Gail later quipped. To make matters worse, Lydia caught Adam trying to steal her wallet. By Tuesday evening, her birthday, things had hit rock bottom. She approached another man, only to be cruelly mocked. Lady, if I wanted to be with a 300-pound woman, I'd be at home with my wife, he sneered before telling her about a blind convention nearby, insulting her looks. Feeling humiliated, Lydia retreated to the hotel's lobby coffee shop, avoiding the Do Not Disturb sign on Gail's door. After spending hours sipping coffee and texting Gail about going home, Lydia finally went back to her room, showered, and slipped into hot lingerie, hoping for some birthday excitement. But the excitement never came. Neither Ethan nor Emma had called to wish her a happy birthday. Emma had only sent a brief text. Lydia felt the sting of their neglect, though she appreciated birthday messages from Eric, Mark, and Kevin. The next morning, Gail grumbled about the budget, hinting that she had paid for the flights and hotel. By Saturday, Lydia was seriously considering ending their friendship, tired of Gail's constant complaining. But Gail had their return tickets, so she kept quiet. Now, lying in her childhood bed, Lydia sighed. Her 40th birthday had been far from the celebration she'd hoped for. Later, Tommy Schultz, the lawyer recommended by Charlie Hines from the Garland County Public Library, reviewed the papers from Stacy Reed's office. He didn't sugarcoat it. "This doesn't look good," he said bluntly. "He gets half, you get half. The house must be sold, and the profits are split evenly. Expenses will be shared," Tommy explained. "Despite being unemployed, your husband isn't asking for child support." "But I don't want a divorce," Lydia protested. "I don't want to lose my home. I miss Harris." "It doesn't change the facts," Tommy said firmly. "If one person wants a divorce, it can happen. Can we get a consultation?" Lydia asked, desperate for any hope. "We can request one," Tommy confirmed, making her smile. "I'll contact Stacy's office." As Tommy made the call, Lydia looked around his office, noticing his book titles. She only heard a few vague responses from him, and "hmm." After the call, Tommy set his phone down and said, "Mrs. Harris, there's an issue. Miss Reed doesn't know where your husband is." He came in, settled her fee, and left. "She only has his email address." "Is that necessary?" Lydia asked. "It's the only way she can contact him, and no, she won't share the email. It's protected by attorney-client privilege," Tommy clarified. "Oh," Lydia murmured, sinking back into her chair. "Your husband told Miss Reed that Emma will be covering her own tuition and dorm costs from now on," Tommy continued. "He mentioned something about starting new traditions. Do you know what he meant?" "No," Lydia whispered, her heart sinking, "but Emma might." Bypassing her 41st birthday, Lydia prepared for work and kissed her father on the cheek. George barely reacted, his hands limp in his lap. "Anything you need before I go?" she asked, trying to sound upbeat. "No," he mumbled. "Take care of Samson, all right?" Lydia added, trying to keep the mood light. "Everything's fine, right? My two main guys will be good?" Yeah, George grunted, barely looking at her. Lydia sighed and headed to work, following her usual route from her dad's house to the library. When her phone buzzed, she waited until she parked to check it. "Happy birthday," flashed across the screen. "Thanks, Emma," Lydia replied flatly, feeling no joy from the message. She had lost 25 pounds since turning 40, but no one seemed to notice or care. Since Ethan left, she felt invisible. Not long after Ethan disappeared, Lydia started to understand what Gail and Ben's open marriage was really about. It wasn't about freedom, it was about survival. Financial constraints had forced them into a loveless coexistence, just roommates in a trailer, devoid of affection. Lydia missed Ethan's warmth, his kisses, especially after she'd cooked him a meal. But after announcing her solo Vegas trip for her 40th, Ethan's affection dried up. Their last real moment together had ended with him avoiding her kiss entirely. An hour after Emma's birthday text, Lydia's phone rang again. It was her boss, questioning why she was late to work. Lydia stumbled out of her car, dazed, and headed to the library's back entrance. Meanwhile, Emma received a thank you text from her mother for the birthday wishes, followed by a photo of a newborn girl. "Antoinette Barbara Harris, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, 17 inches, read the text. Emma found it ironic that her mom and her newborn sister shared the same birthday, though she doubted her mother would find it funny, or even know. At work, Ethan was helping a couple choose hardwood floors when he picked up the phone. "Excuse me," he said, signaling Bobby to assist the couple. Ethan moved to the wall phone and answered the blinking line. He was expecting an update from Babar about an exclusive flooring contract for some developer projects. "Hey, Shorty," Megan's voice teased on the line. "Megan, really?" Ethan said, surprised. "Guess what? You and your 7 inches are making me a mom again," Megan giggled. "Tony's still in diapers, And we're expecting another? Ethan exclaimed. Just left Dr. Pruitt's, Megan replied. Hurry up, we're celebrating at the Stone Grill tonight, Ethan said, grinning. All this talk about my figure is how we got here, Megan chuckled, pushing Tony's stroller into the Texas heat outside the Alliance Square Medical Center. At 4'8", Megan always kept a wary eye on her surroundings. She faced the sun and smiled. The first time Ethan had told Megan Lane he was leaving the gas station, she had asked where he was going. Why? He'd asked. So I can forward your last paycheck, she joked, stepping off her milk crate. Heading somewhere warm? I'm already snowed in. Ethan had smiled at her then. Megan, what's a girl like you doing with an old guy like me? About 7 inches, Megan had shot back, always ready with a comeback. What color are my eyes? She asked, testing him. Dark brown, Ethan answered. And my dimple? Left side, he replied. And when you smile, your right front tooth shows a little crooked. Why say goodbye? Megan had asked as she moved from behind the counter. Ethan had just smiled, unsure of what to say. Now, standing outside Alliance Square, Megan whispered into the phone, Ethan, I love you.